The CEO threw 9 broken supercars at a single dad's door. He turned them into a 3M contract, 9 cars. That is, the number Sylvie Marchetti had sitting in a climate-controlled warehouse outside the city, taking up space and generating exactly 0 revenue, while her company's board asked, at every quarterly meeting, why the asset column still carried $2.4 million in dormant inventory. 9 broken supercars that 3 different specialist shops had looked at and declined to touch. 1 Lamborghini Aventador with a seized gearbox. 2 Ferrari 488s with electrical failures that had stumped 2 separate diagnostic teams. A McLaren 720S with a cracked subframe that one shop had called uneconomical to repair. 5 others in various states of expensive dysfunction. Sylvie had inherited them from the previous CEO, along with the rest of his problems. She had been in the role for 16 months. The board was watching. On a Tuesday morning in March, her head of operations told her about a man named Aidan Holt, who worked out of a converted barn 20 minutes outside town. No website, no certifications on the wall. A 6-year-old son named Noah, who came to the barn after school and sat on an upturned crate and did his homework while his father worked. Noah had a stuffed bear named Bolt. One paw stitched with different colored thread because the original had torn and been repaired by his father. One evening at the kitchen table in the lamplight, while Noah watched and asked questions about why thread held and what would happen if you used the wrong kind. His father had answered every question. The operations manager told Sylvie that Aidan Holt had a waiting list of private clients who would not take their vehicles anywhere else. He told her that one of the Ferraris Aidan had previously worked on was now in a private collection in Monaco. He told her that Aidan had spent 7 years as a principal systems engineer at a motorsport organization whose name Sylvie would recognize, and that before that, he had spent 4 years as a field technician with a military logistics unit that worked with high-performance vehicle systems under operational conditions. Sylvie asked why a man like that was working out of a converted barn. The operations manager said he didn't know. He said it wasn't his business to know. Sylvie told him to arrange a meeting. She said she'd want to see the barn. He told her Aidan Holt didn't do client visits at the barn. He said Holt had been very clear about that. She said she would go anyway. What happened over the next 11 weeks would settle the question of whether she had the right instincts for the job. Once and for all. Press play. This one goes somewhere you don't expect. Marchetti Fleet Solutions had started as a vehicle leasing operation and had been transformed over 12 years into a high-end automotive services company with contracts across 4 sectors: corporate, hospitality, private security, and specialty automotive. When Sylvie took over, the company had 240 employees, 3 service facilities, and a reputation that was solid in 3 of those 4 sectors. The specialty automotive division was the problem. The previous CEO, a man named Xavier Holt, no relation to Aidan, had built it on relationships and charm, and had not noticed, or had noticed and not cared, that the technical capabilities underpinning those relationships had quietly eroded over 18 months. The 9 broken cars were the visible evidence of that erosion. They were not Sylvie's cars. They were the company's. 4 of them had been consigned for servicing by clients, who were now very politely asking for updates on timelines. The other 5 were company-owned assets. All 9 needed work. None of the 3 specialist shops that had been contracted, at significant expense, had been able to complete it. Sylvie was 32. She had come up through the finance side, which meant she understood the problem in precise numerical terms, and had limited patience for explanations that invoked complexity as a reason for inaction. She did not believe cars were complicated in ways that couldn't be solved. She believed the right person hadn't been found yet. Her head of operations was a man named Thomas Reeves. He was 54, had been with the company for 11 years and had a quality Sylvie valued above most things in a professional context. He told her the truth, including the parts she didn't want to hear, and he told it to her before she needed to ask. He had come to her office on that Tuesday in March, with a single sheet of paper and a particular expression. She had learned to pay attention to Thomas's particular expressions. The sheet had Aidan Holt's name, a partial work history, and an address for the converted barn. Thomas had added a handwritten note at the bottom. 3 former clients contacted. All said the same thing, won't go anywhere else. Sylvie read it twice. She said, he doesn't do client visits at the barn. Thomas said, no. She said, so we set up a neutral meeting. Thomas said Aidan had been approached before by larger operations. He said Aidan had declined every time. He said the approach mattered. Sylvie said, then we approach it right. Aidan Holt was 34 years old. He had the hands of someone who worked with them, and the economy of movement of someone who had learned. In some earlier context, that unnecessary motion was a form of waste. He was not tall. He was not physically imposing. He was the kind of man who could stand in a room full of louder people and be the one you found yourself watching without quite knowing why. He had grown up in the kind of town where the options were limited and the expectations followed the options, and he had left at 18 on a scholarship to a technical institute that recognized a particular kind of intelligence that standard metrics were not designed to capture. He had spent 4 years there. He had spent 4 years after that as a field technician with a military unit that used high-performance vehicles in ways that the vehicle's manufacturers had not anticipated and had done so reliably anyway. He had spent 7 years after that at a motorsport organization as a principal systems engineer, working on power units and drivetrain systems at the level where the difference between first and third place was measured in fractions of a degree and tenths of a millimeter. He had left the motorsport organization 14 months ago. He had set up in the converted barn. He had built a client list in 6 months that other shops built in 6 years, through a network that operated entirely on word of mouth and personal recommendation. Because Aidan Holt did not advertise and did not need to, the barn had been a deliberate choice. He had looked at commercial shop space in the city twice. Both times, he had found himself doing calculations that had nothing to do with lease terms. Looking at the neighboring units, the foot traffic on the street, the way the space would feel at 6 in the morning in February, when Noah was still asleep, and the work was the only thing in the room. He had found the barn through a farmer who had heard through someone else, and Aidan had driven out and walked through it once and said he would take it. The farmer had asked if he wanted to see it a second time. Aidan said he had seen what he needed to see. He had done the conversion himself. 6 weeks, evenings and weekends, while Noah stayed with Petra's mother. Insulation, electrical, the new floor section in Bay 2, the lift. He had done it correctly, without shortcuts, in the way he did all physical work, and when it was done, he had called 2 former clients and said he was available, and both had given him work within a week. The list had grown from there in the way that things grow when the underlying substance is real. Not quickly, not loudly, but with the specific permanence of roots rather than weather. His son Noah had been born 6 years ago. His wife, Petra, had died 2.5 years ago. A swift illness, the kind that announces itself late and moves fast, that had taken 11 weeks from first symptom to the end. She had been 31. She had been a structural engineer. She had kept a box of architectural models she had made in school, small, precise, built from card and balsa and wire, on the shelf above the desk in their home office. The models were still there. Noah knew not to touch them, not because Aidan had told him not to, but because Noah understood, in the particular way, that children understand things that have never been explained to them. that some objects are load-bearing in ways that have nothing to do with their physical construction. Bolt the bear had been Petra's gift to Noah on his 3rd birthday, 3 months before the diagnosis. It had been repaired 5 times since. The stitched paw was the most recent repair. Aiden had done it at the kitchen table while Noah watched and asked about the thread. Bolt went everywhere Noah went, to school in his backpack, into the barn on the afternoons Noah came after pickup, onto the upturned crate where Noah did his homework while his father worked. Aiden had never had to ask Noah to be quiet in the barn. Noah understood the barn the way he understood the architectural models, as a space with its own rules, which he had learned by watching rather than by being told. Thomas had arranged the meeting at a coffee shop near the county line. Neutral. Ground, no company branding, no conference room. Thomas attended. Aiden arrived alone. He was on time to the minute, which Thomas noted and later reported to Sylvie as the first useful piece of information he'd gathered. They talked for an hour and 10 minutes. Thomas described the 9 cars. He described the technical problems in as much detail as he had, which was not much. The specialist shops had left diagnostic reports that were thorough in documenting what they had tried, and short on explanation for why it had failed. Aiden listened without taking notes, which Thomas also noted. At the end of the description, Aiden asked 3 questions. He asked which of the 3 shops had worked on the McLaren with the cracked subframe and whether they had provided a photograph of the crack location. Thomas said yes to both and sent the photograph to Aiden's phone while they were sitting there. Aiden looked at the photograph for about 12 seconds. He asked whether the 2 Ferrari 488 electrical failures had been diagnosed on the same equipment or different equipment by the 2 separate teams. Thomas said he didn't know. He said he could find out. Aiden said it mattered. He asked whether Sylvie Marchetti would be willing to have a direct conversation, or whether everything would route through an intermediary. Thomas said that was up to Sylvie. He said he would ask. Aiden said he would rather talk to the person making the decisions. He said it without edge, just the statement of a preference. Thomas said he understood. They shook hands. Aiden left. He had not touched his coffee. Thomas called Sylvie from the parking lot. He said, "He's the one," she said. "Set it up." They met the following Thursday at a spare conference room in a building neither of them worked in. Thomas's concession to Aiden's preference for neutral ground. Sylvie arrived first, which was her habit in any meeting she considered important. She brought the diagnostic files, the photographs, and a summary Thomas had prepared on each of the 9 vehicles. Aiden arrived with Noah. Sylvie had not been told about Noah. Thomas had not known. Aiden had not mentioned it, and he did not apologize for it when he arrived, because he had not understood it to be something requiring apology. He introduced Noah the way he introduced him to everyone, by name, without preamble, without the particular performative awkwardness that some parents used as a preemptive softening. Noah shook Sylvie's hand. He had Bolt tucked under his other arm, the bear's stitched paw resting against his wrist. Sylvie shook his hand with the same seriousness he offered it. She asked his name. He told her. She asked Bolt's name. He told her, and he noted, in the inventory way of children who pay attention, that she had asked without hesitating, which meant she had understood that the bear was a real participant in the introduction and not a prop. He sat down at the end of the table with a small backpack and a book about how bridges were built, and he read it with the concentration of a child who has learned to be self-sufficient in adult spaces. Aiden sat across from Sylvie. He looked at the files she had laid out. He said, "May I?" She said yes. He went through the files the way you go through something you are reading for the second time, not for content but for confirmation, checking what you already suspect, building the map. He spent longest on the McLaren subframe photographs. He spent a surprising amount of time on the Ferrari diagnostic reports from the 2 teams. After 22 minutes, he set the last file down. He said the McLaren subframe crack was in a location that was repairable. He said the previous shop had assessed it as uneconomical because they had been pricing the repair using new OEM components. And the correct approach for that specific crack location was a custom fabricated reinforcement plate, which was less expensive and structurally superior. He said he had done this repair twice before on the same model, in both cases on cars that had been written off by other shops. He said the two Ferrari 488 electrical failures were almost certainly the same root cause, misdiagnosed by both teams, because both teams had run diagnostics with third-party equipment that had a known firmware issue with the 488's battery management system. The failure signature both teams had documented was consistent with a ground fault at the PDU that would not show up correctly on the diagnostic equipment either team had used. He said the repair was not complex once the fault was correctly located. He said he would need to inspect the other 7 vehicles in person before he could give assessments. He said he could do that in one visit if access could be arranged. Sylvie was quiet for a moment. She said, "How long have you known about the firmware issue with the Ferrari diagnostic equipment?" He said about 2 years. He said it was documented in a technical bulletin that the equipment manufacturer had released quietly and that most shops hadn't updated their software to reflect. She said, "The first team we hired charged us $40,000 to not find that." He said, "I know, not vindictive, not satisfied. Just the acknowledgement of a fact about the world, the way you acknowledge that weather is sometimes bad. Not because you want it to be, but because it is." Noah looked up from his bridge book for a moment, glanced at Aiden, and went back to reading. Bolt's stitched paw rested on the table edge. The warehouse inspection happened on a Saturday morning because Aiden preferred to work without the ambient pressure of a business day. And because Noah had no school, and the warehouse had a high stool that served as a suitable crate substitute. Sylvie was there. Thomas was there. Aiden moved through the 9 vehicles in a sequence he had apparently decided in advance, because he moved with the deliberate efficiency of someone following a plan rather than exploring. He did not perform. He did not provide commentary while he worked. He made notes in a small notebook with a mechanical pencil, in handwriting that was compact and precise. Noah did his weekend reading on the high stool near the wall. Bolt sat beside him. At one point, Sylvie brought Noah a bottle of water from the warehouse office, and Noah thanked her with the gravity of a child who had been raised to mean it. It took Aiden 4 hours and 19 minutes to go through all 9 vehicles. He sat down with his notebook and his mechanical pencil, and he told Sylvie and Thomas what he had found. All 9 cars were repairable. Not one of them was a write-off. The 3 specialist shops had, between them, made 4 fundamental diagnostic errors and had declined to make 4 repairs that were well within standard practice at the level. These cars, required because none of the 3 shops had technicians with direct experience on these specific models at this level of systems complexity. He said that without emphasis. He said it the way he said everything, in the same flat, specific voice, as though the magnitude of what he was describing was the story's business, not his. He estimated a total parts cost. He estimated a timeline for each vehicle. He said he could complete all 9 in 11 weeks if he had uninterrupted access to the warehouse for the first 2 weeks and then rotating access thereafter. Thomas did the arithmetic on a sheet he had brought because Thomas always brought a sheet for arithmetic. He looked at his number. He passed it to Sylvie without comment. Sylvie looked at it. The number was not the number they had been quoted by the 3 specialist shops. It was significantly smaller than that number. The difference was enough to fund the other half of the Specialty Automotive Division's operational budget for a year. She said, "What would you need from us to make this work?" He said uninterrupted access, as stated. He said direct communication with her, not through intermediaries, when decisions needed to be made. He said Noah could come on Saturdays. Sylvie said that was not a problem. He said, then we can talk terms. What Sylvie did not know for the first 3 weeks was that her head of specialty automotive, a man named Hunter Dre, who had held the position for 4 years and who had selected 2 of the 3 specialist shops that had failed on the 9 cars, had known about Aidan Holt before Thomas's report. Had known for 8 months, in fact. Had been given Aidan's name by a mutual contact in the industry, and had chosen not to pass it upward because Hunter Dre had a preferred supplier arrangement with one of the 3 shops that the company now used, and that arrangement involved a referral structure that did not appear anywhere in the company's vendor documentation. Hunter had also been the one to recommend the diagnostic approach on the 2 Ferraris. He had recommended the equipment. He had arranged for the second diagnostic team, the one that had used the same equipment and reached the same incorrect conclusion. Because bringing in a second team with the same equipment had the effect of validating an incorrect result through repetition. It looked like due diligence. It was something else. None of this was visible yet. Sylvie was focused on the work. Aidan had begun on the first Ferrari within a week of their terms conversation, and the first Saturday after that, Sylvie came to the warehouse to see how it was going. She arrived at 9 in the morning. Aidan had been there since 6:30. Noah was on his high stool with a new book, this one about the physics of flight, and Bolt was tucked in the crook of his elbow in the position. That meant Noah was deep enough in the reading to have shifted automatically to the comfort position without noticing. Aidan was under the Ferrari on a rolling board. He came out when he heard her. He was not startled by her presence, and he did not treat it as an intrusion. He showed her what he had found and what he had done in the same flat, sequential way he had shown her the diagnostic reports in the conference room. He showed her the ground fault. He showed her the repair. He started the car. It started. The sound a Ferrari 488 makes when it starts correctly after weeks of failing to start at all is not a subtle sound. It is not a sound that requires interpretation. It is entirely self-explaining. Sylvie stood next to the open driver's door and listened to it. Noah looked up from the physics of flight. He looked at the car. He looked at his father. He said, in the matter-of-fact voice he used for accurate observations, "That one's fixed." Aidan said yes. Noah went back to his book. Bolt's stitched paw rested on the high stool edge. Hunter Dre became a problem in week 5. The Lamborghini Aventador was scheduled for that week. The seized gearbox, which was the most significant single repair in the 9-car sequence. Aidan had sourced the specific components he needed from 2 suppliers, one in the UK and one in Germany, and the UK shipment had been confirmed for Tuesday delivery to the warehouse. On Monday evening, the shipment was redirected. Not cancelled, redirected. The shipping company had received a change of address request, apparently from Marchetti Fleet Solutions, sending the components to an address that turned out, on investigation, to be a holding facility used by one of the 3 specialist shops that had previously failed on the Lamborghini. Aidan called Thomas at 6:47 in the evening. He said the shipment had been redirected and that he had not requested the change and that someone in the company had. He said it without accusation. He stated what had happened and what it implied in the same flat voice and let Thomas do his own arithmetic. Thomas called Sylvie at 6:59. She pulled the shipping change records at 7:15 from her home computer. The authorization code used to redirect the shipment was traced within 30 minutes to an internal account used by Hunter Dre's division. The timestamp was 4:48 the previous Friday afternoon. She did not call Hunter that evening. She called her company's legal counsel. She called Thomas. She documented everything. in a sequence, and with a precision that suggested she had been preparing for this kind of problem since long before it arrived. Not because she had anticipated Hunter specifically, but because she had taken over from a CEO who left problems in drawers, and she had learned to open every drawer. By 9:30 that evening, she had 4 months of procurement records on her screen. The preferred supplier arrangement, the referral structure, the 2 diagnostic teams with the same equipment. The 8 months during which Hunter Dre had known about Aiden Holt and had not passed the name upward. The room was quiet, not the quiet of nothing happening, the quiet of everything having already happened, and a person taking accurate stock of what it added up to. The next morning, Hunter Dre arrived at the office at 8:15 as usual. Sylvie was already there. So was Thomas. So was the company's legal counsel and HR director, which were not people Hunter had expected to see at 8:15 on a Wednesday. The conversation lasted 41 minutes. Sylvie was specific, and she was sequential, and she was not unkind, but she was not soft, and she did not allow the conversation to move sideways into explanations that reorganized facts into a different shape. She named the arrangement. She named the diagnostic teams. She named the 8 months. She named the shipment. Hunter said the arrangement was informal. He said the second diagnostic team had been brought in good faith. He said the shipment redirection had been an administrative error. Sylvie said she had the records. He went quiet. She said she would give him the opportunity to resign rather than be terminated for cause. She said the supplier arrangement would be reviewed by legal. She said if the review found what she expected it to find, the matter would be referred for further action. Hunter Dre resigned at 9:03 that morning. His assistant boxed his desk. He was escorted out through the side entrance. He did not speak to anyone on the way. Sylvie drove to the warehouse that afternoon. She told Aiden what had happened. Not all of it, but the relevant structure of it. The arrangement, the redirected shipment, the resolution. Aiden listened without interrupting. She said, "The components will arrive Thursday." "I've confirmed the shipment," he said. "Thank you." She said she was sorry it had happened. She said she was sorrier that it had taken her that long to find it. He said she had found it. He said that mattered. She said, "I should have found it sooner," he said. "You found it when there was something to find." He said it in the tone he used for factual corrections. Not harsh, not reassuring, just accurate. She sat down on a spare stool near the wall. Not Aiden's stool, a different one. She looked at the 9 bays, 5 of them now holding cars in various stages of completion, the other 4 still waiting. She looked at the work on the visible surfaces of the nearest vehicle. The cleanliness of it, the precision of it, the particular quality of work that comes from someone who does not need to be supervised. She said, "How long have you been working alone?" He said 14 months. He said it was his preference. She said she understood that. She said she was going to make him an offer anyway, and that he was free to say no, and that the work on the 9 cars would proceed regardless. He said, "All right." She said she wanted to restructure the specialty automotive division with Aiden as its technical director. Not a day-to-day management role, a technical authority role. Final say on all vehicle assessments, supplier relationships, and diagnostic approaches. He would set the technical standards. Other people would handle the administrative structure around those standards. The compensation was a 3-year contract. She named the number. He was quiet for a moment. He said, "Noah comes on Saturdays," she said. "Noah comes whenever you need him to." He said, "I'll need to think about it." She said, "I know." He thought about it for 4 days. He thought about it the way he thought about complex repairs. Not just the mechanism in front of him, but the whole system it connected to. The downstream consequences of each choice. The places where a decision that looked clean in the short run created a problem further along. He thought about the 14 months in the barn, which had been good months. He thought about the 6 months before the barn, which had been the hardest stretch since Petra died, for reasons he did not go into with most people. He thought about Noah, who was 7, and who would be 8 and then 12 and then 16, and about the things that a life built on a certain kind of work could provide that a life built on a different kind could not. He thought about Petra's architectural models on the shelf, about what it meant to build something that was meant to last, about the difference between a thing that was structurally sound and a thing that merely looked it. He called Sylvie on the 4th evening at 7:22. He said yes. He said he had 3 conditions. The supplier independence condition, no preferred arrangements. Every supplier evaluated on technical merit only, his final call. The Noah condition, flexible hours, school schedules took priority, no fixed attendance requirements, and a documentation condition. Every repair documented at the full technical standard used by Smithsonian-affiliated collections and major motorsport organizations, because he believed the records were as important as the work. And he was not willing to do the work without doing the records. Sylvie said all 3 conditions were acceptable. He said, then we have a deal. The 9 cars took 11 weeks and 2 days, not because of the shipment problem, though that added time to week 5. Because Aiden did not hurry. He worked at the pace the work required, and the work required the pace it required. And the 2 things were not in conflict because he had long ago accepted that they never were, and that the belief that they were was the source of most of the problems that crossed his workbench in one form or another. The days had a shape. Aiden arrived at the warehouse at 6:30, before anyone else, before the building's HVAC had fully caught up with the temperature. He worked in the particular silence of early mornings in large spaces. Not uncomfortable, not lonely, just the silence of a person, and the problem in front of them, nothing else present. He had coffee in a thermos that he made at home, and he drank it slowly, and he worked. And the hours passed in the way that hours pass when you are doing something that is entirely sufficient to fill them. Noah came on Saturdays. He came on some Wednesdays when school let out at noon. He had learned the warehouse the way he had learned the barn, not by being taught its rules, but by watching and absorbing until he understood rules from the inside. He knew where to sit. He knew which sounds were ordinary and which were not. He knew that questions were welcome, but that timing mattered, and that you waited for a natural pause. Not because his father would refuse otherwise, but because a question asked in the right moment got a better answer than a question asked in the wrong one. He had learned this at age 4. He applied it without thinking about it now. Bolt went everywhere Noah went. To the high stool in the warehouse, into the backpack at school, onto the passenger seat on the drive home. The stitched paw caught warehouse light on Saturday mornings in a way that made it look, briefly, like it was the same color as the original thread. The McLaren went back to its owner on a Thursday morning. The owner arrived expecting to be disappointed, because he had been disappointed before. He drove it around the warehouse lot once. He drove it around a second time. He got out and stood next to the car for a moment without speaking. He said, "What did you do to it?" Aiden said, "Fixed it." The owner said, "Nobody else could fix it." Aiden said, "I know," not with pride. The same way he said everything. With the plainness of a person for whom the truth was sufficient and did not need decoration. The Lamborghini went back to its client 2 weeks after that. The client drove it and immediately began negotiations for a standing service arrangement. By the time the 9th car was completed, Aiden had 4 standing service contracts, either signed or in final negotiation. The aggregate annual value of those contracts was $3,140,000. Sylvie stood in the cleared warehouse on the last Friday of the 11th week, after the final car had been collected, and looked at the empty bays. Thomas was there, Aiden was there. Noah was on the high stool, Bolt in his lap, drawing something on a notepad. He had started drawing recently. Precise little architectural drawings, buildings and bridges and structures, which Aiden had noticed without commenting on, because he recognized the drawings for what they were without needing to name it. Sylvie said. 4 contracts, Thomas said. 4, she said. In 11 weeks, Thomas said. 11 weeks and 2 days. She looked at Aiden. She said, when we first met, I told my operations manager I was going to come to your barn whether you liked it or not. Aiden said he had heard. She said, I'm glad I did. He said, so am I, she said. Your father fixed all of them, she said. And then she stopped, because she had been about to say it to Thomas, as though Noah wasn't in the room, and Noah was in the room and was listening the way he always listened, with Bolt on his knees and his pencil still in his hand. She looked at Noah directly instead. She said, your dad fixed all 9 of them. Noah looked at his drawing for a moment. Then he looked up. He said, he fixes things. 3 words. Flat and certain and complete. In the voice children use when they are telling you something they have known for a long time and are only now being asked about. Sylvie crouched, all the way down, knees close to the warehouse floor, and looked at him at eye level. She said, he does. Noah said, my mom would have liked the cars. He said it simply. Not with grief, exactly. With the particular tone of a child who has integrated something hard into the structure of how they talk about the world. Not gone, not raw, just present, the way the architectural models were present on the shelf. Aiden was standing near the second bay. He did not respond to it. He did not need to. He put his hands in the pockets of his jacket, and he looked at the empty bay, and he let Noah's sentence be what it was. Sylvie stood up slowly. She said she would see Aiden Monday. He said he would be there. He drove home in the fading afternoon with Noah in the passenger seat. Bolt was on the dashboard. The good day position, which Noah had established independently at age 5 and maintained without deviation. The stitched paw caught the last of the light and then didn't as they turned east into the long shadow of the tree line. Noah was telling him about the bridge drawings, about a specific type of cable stay design he had been reading about how how the cables did the work that the deck couldn't do alone, and how you had to tension them exactly right, or the whole thing went wrong in a way that wasn't obvious until it was. Aiden said, where'd you read that? Noah said the bridge book. He said there was a whole chapter on tension. He said he thought it was interesting that something invisible did most of the work. Aiden said he thought that was interesting, too. He drove. The road was the same road it always was at this hour. The familiar landmarks in the familiar order. The light doing what early evening light does in the tail end of a long week. The barn would be there in the morning. The work would be there. 4 contracts, 11 weeks. He had not decided yet whether to tell his father, who lived 3 states away, and who called on Sundays, and who had put the tools in his hands when he was 11, and said what he had said. He thought he might tell him. He thought the old man would say, well, of course. He thought he would say it exactly the way Benjamin Marsh would have said it, and the way good old men always said it. Not surprised, not celebratory, just quietly, accurately confirming something they had known for a long time. Noah had gone quiet, not asleep, just watching the road. Bolt's paw rested against the dashboard, and the cab was warm, and the engine was doing what the engine did, which was its one reliable thing, and Aiden kept his hands at 10 and 2 and drove them home.